Welcome to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. It's like coffee with an analyst, or it could be whiskey with an analyst reading a spreadsheet, linking crime events, identifying a series, and getting the latest scoop on association news and training. So please don't be that analyst and join us as we define the law enforcement analysis profession one episode at a time.
Thank you for joining me. I hope many aspects of your life are progressing. My name is Jason Elder, and today our guest has 5 years of law enforcement analysis experience, all with Everett Police Department in Washington. She has a master's from Seattle University, and she's on her way to Marysville PD to be a crime analyst and intel analyst. So we got her just in between jobs. She's also the VP of Communications for NORCAN. Please welcome Emily Dorscher. Emily, how are we doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me today.
We got a lot to go over.
We have a lot to talk about.
Yes. You were hiding up there in the Pacific Northwest.
Trying to keep a low profile, yes. Well, yes. Lowish.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about your contributions to the profession, and we're also going to talk a little bit about NORCAN. Going to get an update from them, and we're also going to talk about just the hiring process as a whole, because you've sat on a couple of hiring boards, plus you just went through this whole hiring process. So we're going to talk about that on the back half of the interview. So, all right.
Absolutely.
Let's start from the beginning, though. How did you discover the law enforcement analysis profession?
Very happenstance. I went to college in northern Minnesota, Bemidji State University. Go Beavers.
Of course, Beavers.
Of course, the Beavers. Known for lumberjacks. They're just nature's lumberjack. So I got my bachelor's in criminal justice up there after playing around with like forensic chemistry type thing. Decided I like the law enforcement aspect of this more than the science aspect of this, and decided to pursue some work in there. Had the opportunity to work in juvenile corrections for a little bit. Wasn't my thing. Worked a little bit in law enforcement as a reserve officer, and just through those experiences, I knew that wasn't exactly what I wanted to do, but I wanted to do something adjacent, but I didn't know what that was. So I kind of hinted to one of my professors at the time that I want to stick with this. I just don't have a clear path. And she was like, you should become an analyst. You should become a crime analyst. And I had never heard that before. And so I looked into it, and I looked into some programs and I went and took the test to get my master's and found a couple programs and ended up coming out to Seattle to visit and fell in love with the area. There's a program here at Seattle University. I started with the crime analyst certification, and I ended up just staying and getting the whole master's. Through that experience, I got to do an internship at the Criminal Justice Training Commission. Washington State trains all of their police officers through the CJTC. So I got to work with the Basic Law Enforcement Academy on a research project looking at the Guardian model of policing. And that took me international. I got to report on that. And from there, I got a little bit more experience in research and some of the kind of reporting pieces from maybe a more like administrative analyst type piece, and was able to take that experience into my resume. And from there, got hired on with Everett Police Department and hung out there for 5 years. They've got a fantastic team of analysts, and I'm now branching out on my own to Marysville Police Department, coming up here very shortly. So
you had earned your master's degree before starting at Everett, and
correct.
I noticed too on your resume that the master's degree is in research and evaluation. So when you went into that master's degree, what was your plan?
So my plan was just to get the crime analysis certificate, and they've got I think it's a year and a half instead of a full 2 years. You don't have to test out of the master's or do like a big research project. It's you complete the coursework, and if you get a certain GPA, then you get the certification. I kind of went into it and I took a lot of the courses, and I was like, it's not that much extra to just go and get the full master's degree. And a lot of the courses that I was taking were crime analysis courses. So they were research methods in crime analysis or statistical analysis or crime mapping. And so they were ones that I've used in my career, but I felt like there was something to be said of, you know what, just take the extra little bit of time, get that master's degree. And because of the classes that kind of overlapped between the certification and this specific track within the master's degree, it made the most sense to go with the research and evaluation track.
Okay. So looking back now at the certification, because now you have 5 years of analysis experience now. So how do you see the certificate now? I mean, do you think their certificate is on the mark in terms of what it teaches you? Is there something that you wish that the certification had?
I think the one critique that I would have of it is I would like to see more analysts being a part of the analysis certificate. So the course that I had on crime analysis was taught by a chief of police, which was interesting to me. I think it was kind of they're available and they have a pretty good connection with their crime analyst. They were from a smaller department, but there just was that little bit of disconnect that I work very closely with my chief, but I would never ask him to teach crime analysis. It just was a little bit of a strange, I guess, decision at that point. I don't know if they're still teaching it. I don't know if that's still a part of it. At the time, too, the class that I took on mapping was all ArcGIS based, which is fantastic. I use ArcGIS quite a bit, but it was the desktop version, which is no longer supported. So I'm hoping that got updated, but there are so many other technologies that I use even for mapping. We do a lot of mapping in like Power BI, and it's just so maybe have a little bit more of a broad kind of service of here are a lot of the different things you can be using. And because another place that I have mapped before, and I didn't know that you could do this, and then I did it and I was like, I'm a superstar. You can map timelines, like visual map timelines in Excel. And I didn't know that until I came across it on happenstance, and we ended up doing a project in Everett showing there was this feeling that a Walmart was this like source of all this crime. And we ended up mapping calls for service and cases and did it on a timeline. And you could see that it was all shifted from this apartment complex that was having problems and being managed just outside of our jurisdiction. So then it became a whole topic of, okay, now we have to reach out to that jurisdiction because their issues are kind of coming into our jurisdiction and we're getting complaints about it at this Walmart now instead. And that was done in Excel. And had I known that, I would have used it much earlier in my career than just 8 months ago.
Yeah, I don't even know if I'm familiar with that technique. We might have to talk offline. Maybe I'll get you create a tutorial for that for YouTube.
Absolutely.
I think one of the things that I hear folks say about certifications is it just feels like you take 1 or 2 analyst classes and then the rest of it is basically a criminal justice degree, and really don't go into some of the deeper level that would have been beneficial, especially like data management, for instance, really get into some of the technical skills there. I don't know if you have the same feeling. Again, where I realize we're a couple years out from the program, but I don't know if you got that same feeling or not.
Yeah, there was definitely, I mean, we had criminal behavior courses, criminology, so looking at the different theories and stuff. And I think that those were helpful. And they gave me those cool kind of moments of clarity of, oh, well, we know this because of this behavioral theory. And then all of the cops in the room would go, ooh, and I would look like this cool, like, ooh, look at my knowledge. And so there was that, and I definitely would say that it has helped me in investigations of saying we know from research that these are factors in this, or that it can be related to this or that type of thing. But I 100% agree with you. I did not understand how much data management I would be doing as an analyst, and that would take up the volume of my time. And people also who received my products wouldn't understand the volume of data management that occurred, and even the relationships with police officers, helping them understand this is why we put this in this way so that we can get this cool thing on the other end. And same with records, making sure if you're doing records management that that's a part of data management as well. And if you are choosing not to do something or missing something or changing something without understanding why you're changing it, it can have negative effects on what we're doing. So the communication and data management, I think, is a big piece too that I didn't understand going into the profession, that I would share with people who are becoming analysts, and understanding that you are going to have Excel sheets that are thousands of lines worth of data that you meticulously have to go through, and you might get your outcome and then go, nope, something's wrong, and then have to go back in and do it again and again until you get the thing that you're looking for. So yeah.
All right, so let's do this. I do obviously want to get to your time in Everett, but I do also want to talk about your research analyst position here before you became a crime analyst. So this is an interesting job that you got doing this research, and it actually took you to Prague, right?
Yeah, it was an incredibly unique experience and so beneficial to me. I got to be embedded in the basic law enforcement academy with these incoming police officers, looking at the curriculum that was being developed and taught at the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission. The research that I did was the effect of guardian-focused training for law enforcement officers. And so that's looking at the classic quasi-military, or as we kind of termed it, the warrior model, very protection, enforcement oriented, to this more protection oriented style of law enforcement, looking at protecting democracy, protecting life, protecting property, all while acknowledging the civil rights of the individual. And so it's looking at things like integrating crisis intervention training, CIT training, into the basic law enforcement academy. They created the LEAD model of communication. In law enforcement, we have acronyms. So it's listen and explain with equity and dignity. And it's just that getting to understand people's history, their cultural history, understanding people's culture, and understanding that because of that, their interactions with law enforcement may be different than the individual who's becoming a police officer, their experience with police and policing, and just trying to get a better understanding of society from a police perspective.
So how did this get linked from Washington State over to Prague?
I had the opportunity to present the outcomes of this at a conference in Prague. And that was such a cool experience to go to an international conference and talk about these shifts in policing. Policing in the United States has a very specific, I'm going to say, stereotype in the world. And so it was interesting to go there and see the research that was being done internationally in criminal justice, law enforcement circles in other countries, and then bring this in and have them kind of be like, oh, this is really cool. This is really interesting. I want to talk to you about what we're doing here and how that has worked, and all of those types of things. So it was a really cool experience. I took full advantage of it, and I backpacked across Germany while I was out there. And that was in itself a cool experience. I am going to say, if you are in your early 20s and you have the opportunity to just unplug for a little bit and go do that, it will open up your world to so many cool human experiences and opportunities. The history out there was so interesting to learn about from a non-American perspective, right? Because everything that we're taught here is from the American perspective. So being able to go out there and just see everything from a different kind of viewpoint was really cool, and I definitely recommend it.
Very cool. So with this model that you were developing at the time, so this is 2017, 2018. Has this now been implemented into Washington State? And if so, what's been the reaction? What's been the results?
So at the point that I was working in it, this was actually implemented in 2013. I was a part of the third kind of round of it. We were doing kind of the close of the research. So we had gone through a series of classes. The cohorts all have individuals, they'd come in, we had a measure of like empathy and understanding. We do it at the beginning and at the end and then measure the difference. And they had been doing this for quite a while. So the culture shift had really started in 2013, and it was about as well accepted as you would expect it to be in a law enforcement. Right? The two things that law enforcement hates are when things change and when everything stays the same. So it was not well accepted. By the time that I got there, there were still grumblings about like, oh, it's hug a thug, it's going to be soft on crime, it's going to be this, that, and the other thing. And so there were people that were brought in as a brand new recruit hating this concept. Like they had been told by their department that this is garbage, that this isn't how we're actually going to be. So just do the things that you're going to do and we'll retrain you. And
wow.
it got to the point where you'd be like, oh, this department's sending a recruit. Great. He's going to do great in this portion of the class, right? Because they would come in with that mindset. And it would be like, if you're going to work for this department, this is the mindset you're going to have without causing too much problems. Those departments stick out now in Washington State. Those are the ones that stick out culturally, I would say, from the norm. And I don't have hard stats on that, but those are the ones that you hear about having issues in the news. There's this perception that they've created for themselves, and it has not benefited them. It is still being implemented, as far as I know, at the training facility. It's still on their website as something that's being taught. It had been brought in by the commissioner at the time, Sue Rohr, was the one who had implemented it. She has since retired, and there's been quite a bit of shift there. So I don't know, without sitting in on it again, I don't know how much of it is still being implemented or how seriously it's being taken, right? I think that was another big part of it is if you don't have trainers that believe in it, just like anything, if you have somebody training something and they don't believe in it, you're not going to get the full benefit of it. So I don't know. I guess I would have to ask some of the newer officers what they're experiencing with it. But I do know from a kind of macro perspective, it seems to have had an effect.
That is interesting. And you just pit anybody that's ever been in law enforcement for a period of time. When you said that it went over just as well as you could expect, there's just that image of a certain officer that you have in mind.
Yes.
Like I can see so and so saying like,
Yep.
oh,
just
rolling
close
their
your
eyes.
eyes. Yep, close your eyes, and that officer will come into your vision, and that's exactly the picture I was trying to paint for you. Yes.
That's good. All right, so let's get to Everett then. So you're walking in the door. Are you the first analyst, or what issues are you trying to? What problems are you trying to work on when you get into this position?
Yeah. So I wasn't the first analyst. I wasn't even the first kind of set of analysts. They had a crime analysis program for a while. Prior to me being there, they had 2 analysts. They both left, and then they hired a separate analyst and then myself. I came in fresh. I had never had an analyst job. Even as a research analyst, stepping into a crime analyst position was very different. I didn't have an ethics board that had written rules out of what I could and couldn't do. There were not really any standard operating procedures for the position. And so I really, really, really leaned on the analyst who was already working there. She had worked for the department prior. She was military family, so she left and then came back. And so she had analyst experience all over the United States. She'd worked in Virginia, she'd worked in California, Washington. And so she was an amazing resource for me. And I leaned so hard on her the first
what's her name?
months. Erica Bennett.
Okay.
And she's on the NORCAN board as well, and is working for Everett still, and she's fantastic. She really taught me, like, this is what we do and here's how this works, and just really helped introduce me to the profession. I wish that people who are like, I want to become an analyst and I don't really know, I'm in this new department, or they're just setting up an analyst program, I wish they had an Erica, because that was such a big thing for me, to have her to be like, is this a stupid idea, right before I said it to somebody else, and they'd be like, what? Or like, I'm about to send this email. Can you make sure that I'm not going to get fired? Like,
Yeah.
I want it just enough to get my point across, but not get
Yeah.
reported to HR. Is this good? And so she was very much that person for me, and helped me develop to a point that I felt comfortable saying, here's this opportunity elsewhere, and I can really be out on my own and do these things and bring all of this work and experience that I have to them and really benefit them. So she was great. And after a few months of being there and learning the RMS system, that's another thing that I'd love to see in analyst certification and training, is learning about CAD and RMS and what they are. And that could be really hard, because there's so many different flavors of records management systems. If I walked into somebody and they're like, we work with Motorola or Spillman, I'd be like, I'm lost. But we do everything in Tyler Technologies New World. And that took so long for me to get to a point where I was like, I can do all this stuff and this is great. And we've integrated it into so many different things. And it would be great to have a little bit of an intro to that, because that was definitely a learning curve. And it's still, sometimes you get in there and you're like, oh, this is information I'm looking for. And you run the query and it's like, that's an empty data point. Cool. But yeah, so kind of Everett got there, kind of learned the ropes. About a year and a half in, we started messing around with Power BI and the Power Platform, and kind of looking at all of that, taking our comp stat style report, we called it EStat, E for Everett, our EStat report, and putting it into Power BI. And that gave us more time to do data management, right? Look at, okay, this number is high, but it doesn't make sense. So we need to go and review these, and oh no, the officers are selecting this piece wrong, and so it's getting categorized this way. And that was fantastic to be able to do more analysis of, like, okay, now we can say that this is actually something that is high, and we can look at it and say, okay, what do we do with this? How do we fix this? Is this a police thing? Is this a traffic engineering thing? Is this a specific group of people? Do we have deployable units to take care of these issues? And so that was a really cool aspect of when I was onboarded, being able to pick that up and be at the very baseline of that type of a thing.
Yeah. Now, do you feel the EStat was still directed maybe more towards patrol, still trying to go through, and crime's high there, so we're going to focus our patrol efforts on that area, as opposed to maybe, did it get into more of the problem solving? Did it get into where this is an issue and we're going to be working maybe even outside the department, working with other resources to try to improve the situation beyond just field interviews and making arrests?
Yeah, so we actually had two separate reports. We had our EStat report, which was looking at our, like, offense rates, right? Our offense rates higher this month over this month, this year over this year, and doing percent change, and kind of doing that type of an evaluation. But we didn't do a lot of geographic work in our EStat. We had a separate report, which was our tactical report, or ETAC. We're so good with acronyms. Our ETAC report, which was more of mapping where those offenses were occurring, mapping where our call load was, and looking then more at that hotspot, or looking at, okay, do we have this unique address that keeps popping up? What are the issues that are happening there? Is this something that we can deploy code enforcement to? Is this an animal control issue? Is this something that our parks department can look into? Is this something that maybe is more of a social work and we can deploy our social work or integrated social workers to kind of deal with? Like, for example, we might have an address that pops up, and looking at the calls, they're all behavioral health calls, right? The person's calling in and they're reporting something that just is a little bit weird, right? You're looking at it and you're going, I don't think a bunch of little green army men are coming in and setting off your fire alarms. So let's go talk to this person, kind of get a sense of it. Yep, there seems to be a behavioral health issue here. And then when they call in with similar things, we can say, all right, at this point, we need to get social workers involved. They probably need some sort of a continuum of care. And then those social workers can set up those medical appointments or behavioral health appointments. And hopefully then that call hotspot, which is just like a general hotspot, right? We're having them call in 4, 5, 6. We have one woman who called in a 6-month time span, like 3,200 times.
Oh, wow.
And so her one address was just this like bright blip if you looked at it from a call load perspective, right? It just was this beacon.
It's more dense than the hospital.
Where you're like, oh my gosh. And so we were able to then say, like, yeah, and this was something the patrol officers knew, right? They saw those calls. They saw her name come up all the time. They knew that this was an issue, but they didn't know how to address it. And all of a sudden we were like, look, see this here. These are the calls. We can go in and say she needs this. And we actually ended up getting the courts involved, and the courts made her daughter take care of her. It was kind of a like, if you need to take care of her or she'll become a ward of the state, and we're going to do all these. And her daughter did. Her daughter got involved, not even realizing that these were issues, because when she talked to her mom was fine. But once you see how much she's calling in and having these issues, then they were able to get her the care she needs. And when I left, she was down to just a couple of calls a year.
Oh.
So yeah, it's kind of like all of a sudden when she calls, it's like, oh, there might actually be something going on. There was a point, actually, I recently talked to one of our dispatchers, and she said that after that court case had happened, there was a dispatcher who started a welfare check at her house, because she was like, nobody had heard from her. And so we thought something had happened, and we were worried that it was going to turn into a death investigation.
Sure.
But they ended up telling the dispatcher, no, she's gotten the care that she needs. That's why she's not calling all the time. And I was like, oh, cool. That's a positive outcome that she wasn't expecting. So
that's a very positive outcome. So
yeah,
it is. It's a lot, and we go through these from time to time in our society, and then what we're asking officers to do, and you're sent to these houses, and right, there's training's going to take you so far, but the idea of really getting into mental health and getting into what should be done to help folks outside of the police department, it's really hard for a patrolman to really do anything like that.
Yes.
It's really difficult. So kudos to you and that program for getting that woman the help that she needed.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Duong. I'm a crime analyst with the Saskatoon Police Service. The public service announcement that I have is especially for junior analysts, but also senior analysts. Just be true to yourself and recognize that the police culture that you're in shouldn't necessarily shape who you are, but you have something to bring towards your service as a benefit as well.
Hey, this is Shawna Gibson from the Pacific Northwest. This is to all you crazy PEMCO drivers out there. Do you know what a zipper merge is? It is when you let somebody else get in front of you and then somebody comes in behind you. You really don't have to push everybody out. So may you all learn the zipper merge, and may the 405 and I-5 be a little bit more pleasant to drive down. Good luck with that, all of you crazy drivers.
All right, let's actually go on to your analyst badge story. And for those that may be new to the show, the analyst badge story is a career-defining case or project that an analyst works. And very interesting situation you have here, because it's not necessarily your typical analyst badge story, but I am really curious on this story. So it's 2021 and pandemic time, and you get involved in this project. So let's just start from the beginning.
Yeah, so I started with the department in 2019. So this was about 2 years in. Part of my assignment at the department was working with our community outreach and enforcement team. They are going out and working with our homeless population. Everett has a significantly high homeless population compared to the general United States. And so we had a team of integrated social workers who worked with officers in a specialized patrol unit to go around and deal with any calls for service that were coming in that seemed to be about the homeless population trespassing. There's a guy sleeping on our lawn and we want him moved along. Nuisance calls. There's people doing drugs outside of this location. Please come and take care of them. But then also going out when we didn't have a high call load and contacting encampments and trying to offer resources to people that they may not have available to them. So it was partially a law enforcement piece. You had the enforcement opportunity or option available, but there was really a focus on, can we give these people the tools that they need so that they don't become these nuisance calls or trespass calls or substance calls. And so when I started there, they were taking paper notes in the field, writing down names and addresses and car license plate numbers, and sometimes they were adding them to their CAD calls, and sometimes they weren't even opening CAD calls, which is its own problem. But they would come back to the office at the end of the day and they would type all of these things into a daily activity report, which was just a SharePoint site, but it would be one row would have all of this data in it. Right. So you'd have one row of this date, the date column, and then you'd have the names column, and then you'd have the services offered column, and then whatever services were taken. And if you close your eyes as an analyst and you think about how this looks, I hope you get shivers down your spine, because there was no way to link any of the people with what they were being offered and who accepted what. And it was just blocks, literal blocks in this SharePoint list of names and then social services. Sometimes they were the acronyms for the social services. Sometimes it was the full name. There were cars in the people's list, all sorts of things. And once a month, volunteers would come in and they would take all that information and transpose it into an Access database that had been created. And then that Access database would return a query to show, yep, the men's mission had this many people sent to it this month and this many people were contacted. And it was literally just a count of the names that had been pulled over from this daily activity report. And they brought me in and they're like, hey, we have some grants and stuff we're working on, and this information just isn't good enough. And I looked at it and I was like, no, it really isn't. Like, you have people that are being contacted every single day. And the way that they were counting it, it was like, those are individual, unique people that were contacted, not multiple contacts with one person. And so there just was like a general, it had been built without really looking at what it was going to be used for, right? Like they knew they needed something, but they weren't really sure what. So I got to work and I'm like, okay, we're going to find some way to manage this. And I was like, what money do we have from this grant that we can put towards some sort of a records management system? And they're like, zero. Like, you don't have any money for this. I was like, great. So we looked at some companies and the companies were like, yeah, if you want to start this up, it's $100,000 to start up and then $16,000 a year. But if you want access to the data, every time you try to access it, it's an additional fee and all of this. And it was just not going to work, right? Like there was no selling this to the chief of like, this is going to be worth it, even if it meant that we were getting this better information. So 2021, COVID hits, we all get sent home. Everett, our claim to fame is having the first case of COVID in the United States. So we shut down quick. We were sent home and told, work from home. Here are the things you have to do. Don't stir up other stuff, right? Do the things that you're required to do, but don't go looking for work, kind of thing, because we don't have the capacity to deal with it and do this extra stuff, right? So I was like, this is a good opportunity for me to look a little bit deeper into how we're going to do this. And so I ended up finding, because we were working with Power BI, that Power BI was part of it, the Power Platform for Microsoft, which included 3 other pieces at that time. There was Flow, it's now called Power Automate, and Power Apps. And I just started kind of clicking through them. I was like, oh, what is this? Right? Doing my thing. And I realized that the Power Apps was a way to create phone applications or tablet applications. And as I looked more into it and I looked at the forums talking about it and the things that you could do, it kind of just was like a light bulb moment of, this could be the way that we track this information. If we had a way that officers in the field, while they're making these contacts, can look and say, I'm talking to this person and I offered them this, and this, and it was at this location and all of these different things, then we could track not only the unique individuals that we're contacting, we can look at how many multiple contact opportunities people are having. We can look at the locations that we're having the highest volume of contacts. We can look at dates and times that people are being contacted. We can look at whether or not certain social services are, what the acceptance rate for these people are, and why they may or may not be accepting. And then we ended up expanding it to, all right, we're going to track locations of encampments. So we can see where we're having these camps set up and what type of kind of septed, what kind of engineering the city can do to reduce these numbers of camps that they're problematic. They do create crime, right? We have stabbings and shootings in these encampments. We have property crimes associated with them, shoplifting or just stealing of personal belongings and stuff at these camps. And so it was really important for us to go in and try to get these people the social services. And so tracking those encampments to see how they move throughout the city and how they can kind of be associated to get a better understanding of how our interactions are working and how we can do that. So I ended up creating in Power Apps this way for them not only then to input this information, which sometimes was enforcement, criminal justice information, but more often than not was kind of social services, community type information that is not normally captured in a criminal justice database. And be able to kind of link that together and create a platform and a format where then they could see a continuum of care from our perspective to say, well, we've contacted John Doe this many times and we'd offered him this many services and he's refusing or he's not following through. And all right, we're now at a place that we think enforcement is going to be the option for you now, right? We're going to go and you are going to get cited for criminal trespass and you are going to go to jail and do all of these things. And then we can say it wasn't for a lack of us trying to offer them services. It was that they needed to be enforced upon, if you will. And kind of go that route. But then because it's part of the Power Platform, also create reports and dashboards that are available to the chief of police, to the mayor, to the head of the social work team to say, these are the kind of macro level, the number of contacts we're having, the number of active camps we have in the city, the volume of people in those camps, all of that type of information, which before just had not been available. And it ended up this past year getting picked up by the community service team, which has developed it started just in the police department, but then has integrated into the fire department as well, and then into the library. So we actually have social workers in the libraries in Everett, so people can come in and contact a social worker and help get set up with services. And so we created a version kind of 2.0 for them to go in that had less of the law enforcement stuff and more of the community support aspects. And so we were able to expand that to the city and look at different things that we could use Power Apps for the police department, for engaging in data and information that isn't normally in a police records management system, but is still something that's important for us to have that information on and be able to use beyond just kind of putting it into a space.
Yeah. So, I mean, for some reason, my head's going very technical. Like, so where is this data being stored? How many people can
Yeah.
be using it at once? What were the growing pains there?
Yeah, so we store the data is stored in SharePoint.
Mm-hmm.
So without super deep diving it,
Mm-hmm.
there were kind of three pieces of the application. You had the person piece, the camp piece, and the vehicle piece. And each one of those pieces had they're called lists in SharePoint. It's kind of like an Excel sheet, right? Of you got your rows and columns and all of that. And so each one of those three pieces had two lists. And those two lists were the individual data. So you'd have John Doe, his birthday, his demographics, any kind of person specific information you would need. And then you had a list that was interactions. So every time we spoke with John Doe, this is what happened. And those two would then communicate with each other to say, okay, well, when I look up this information about John Doe, I can see that this is the number of times that we contacted him, and here's the other information we need about him. Same with the vehicles and camps. Each camp had a location. I was able to, in Power Apps, make it so that the officer could push a button and it would pull the latitude and longitude of the camp, because encampments don't have physical addresses, right? It's not like the Safeway where it's like, oh, it's right here and it's always going to be here forever because there's a building here. That's not how homeless encampments work. And so they were able to press a button and it would pull their coordinates from their cell phone data. And then we'd get on a map, here it is. Here's the point that the camp is at. And then size of the camp and the first time it was contacted and all that information. But then we could see every time it contacted, well, did the population of this camp grow or decrease? Were there new safety concerns? Were there special populations, children, veterans that had things available to them that we could bring in? Any kind of information like that. And then vehicles, same thing. What's the license plate, VIN, whatever you can get on the vehicle? And then how many times are we contacting it and where are we contacting it at? So there were lots of lists, right? Just for those as 6. And then we get into the people were like, oh, well, we want to know who we can contact on behalf of them. Well, there's another list of alternative contacts. Oh, we want a list of the people working for these social groups so we can give their information directly to the person while we're standing there. So there's another list for that. And I think by the second version of this, I want to say there's 13 SharePoint lists that all feed in and out of that application. From a user perspective, we had, I think at any given time, less than 15 people who can access it. It's the social work teams are 2 or 3 individuals per kind of group. And then the officers also the officers that were assigned to COET had access to it as well. So the only individuals who were putting into it were the social workers and the specific officers that were assigned to the COET team. So if patrol officers were contacting people and offering resources and stuff, those were not a part of that, because it was really focused on what is this specific team doing and how can we track that to kind of justify continuing having them available and seeing what they are doing to assist patrol.
So have you had a chance to evaluate the impact of this app?
I would have to ask probably the leaders of the group, because after building it, I've been very hands off with it other than troubleshooting. I created the dashboards and stuff, but I really wanted it to be an opportunity for them to be like, oh no, I need to run into this meeting and I need these numbers type of a thing. And so they can just pull them up real quick and they have them available. I would say the expansion of the community support team, I can't say for certain that the app led to that, but I would have a hard time believing it didn't play into it to show like we have this volume of work that we're doing, and a lot of it are these types of things that we also have our fire team going to and being a part of, or we have these things that if we had a location other than the police department, that people could stop in and ask for resources, such as a library, which is known for having resources, then we would have the opportunity to serve those people that maybe aren't willing to come to a police department and ask for them because they don't like police or they have warrants or whatever would keep them from going to those locations. So I can't say for certain, right? But
Sure.
I think it definitely played into that decision. One of the things specifically that I know came out of this is this past year, they do the point in time collection of numbers for homeless, just like, I don't remember which federal alphabet does it, but one of the groups, they do a point in time count, right? So everybody who works with homeless population, you get a group that goes out and it's like you count the number of homeless people you can see. And that number then determines how the federal government will allocate resources to those groups doing that outreach. And I think one of the cooler things that we were able to do is take that point in time count from this past year and say, this is our point in time count. But over the past year, we can prove that we've actually contacted this many unique individuals over the past year. And that number that we did in our point in time calculation was a fraction of that number. So we can prove that we're getting funding for this small group of people, but actually having to support a much larger group of people using that same funding. And so it was just kind of that interesting of like being able to be like, hey, you're this practice that we've done is flawed and we've known it, but now we can prove it, right? And so it was really cool to kind of be the person that made that happen.
No, that's a great project, and you get so much money, then maybe that 100,000 that the one vendor was offering doesn't seem so bad, right?
Right. We did have another agency reach out to us and they're like, we want in. And I was like, well, you gotta ask. And at the time, our chief was like, we really just want to have our data. Like, it's really important for us to understand. And so I was working with another individual on this project who's kind of like our chief technical officer, except he's actually an officer. And he's like, well, let's contract with them, right? Like, we can offer it to them and we'll build it for them and it can exist on their kind of a thing. And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. I know how to do it. So let's do it. And he goes, well, we're going to offer it to them, but it's going to be competitive with these other companies, right? And so we offered it and we're like, yeah, we'll do it for this amount of money. And they were like, no, we want it for free. And we're like, oh, not going to happen. So there definitely was, like, we had the opportunity to kind of go out and say, this is something that people would be willing to pay for, maybe not as much as we asked, but it's definitely something that there's a market for. When we were looking at it, the companies that were offering it, we looked at a number of them. And for us, a lot of them were actual case management, like you are a social worker and you have this one individual and you see them through all of the social services. And we were like, we're doing like light case management, right? We're contacting a bunch of people and we may or may not contact them again. And we're going to offer them things, but we're not sitting with them in detox and checking in on them. And we're not sitting with them. I say the most involved we would get is like driving somebody to get their driver's license or identification card and sitting there and making sure that they fill out the paperwork correctly. And that would be the extent of, like, you get an afternoon of our social workers or an afternoon of our officers going and helping you with that stuff. But we're not going to come and check in on you after we put you into these more extensive programs. So a lot of those other ones just weren't what we were looking for. We needed this hybrid, and we ended up being able to build it ourselves. And that was a fantastic outcome.
All right, very good. As I mentioned in your intro, you're in between work. You're taking your talents to Marysville, which is, as you mentioned yesterday, right up the road. So what went into this decision to leave Everett for Marysville?
Well, I live closer to Marysville. I can throw a rock and hit Marysville. For those of you that don't live on the West Coast, I live 15 miles away from Everett, which means my commute is 50 minutes. in traffic. And with where I live and where the Civic Center in Marysville is, it's about 15 minutes. So that played a huge part of it. Location. Marysville does not have a team of analysts. They have a single analyst, and he is very much looking forward to retirement. And that's so exciting for him, and I wish him well. And I'm so happy to be taking the torch from him. And so for me, it was an opportunity to go in and be me as an analyst and not be a part of a team and making decisions. I love being a team player, but there is something to be said about knowing analysts. We like to know everything. And when you're in a team and you're working in different groups and are assigned to different groups, you miss aspects of that, right? Where it's like, oh, you're working on something, and then you hear that somebody else is working on something similar, and you're like, wait, why are we both doing this? Why is this not the same thing? It's going to end up going to the same person. It's probably for the same project, but nobody really got assigned to it. So people are kind of trying to get ahead of the questions. And so there's a little bit of that. And just being able to be the singular analyst that kind of gets to be in everything is intriguing to me. So I'm excited to kind of do that. I got to sit with the chiefs yesterday and talk about their goals and stuff. They're just standing up Power BI and the Power Platform and stuff. So I get to be at the ground of that again. And so I feel like there's a part of me that's like, I get to learn from my mistakes and just know these are things that are going to come up because we had to learn the hard way at Everett. And I can get ahead of those here in Marysville and bring that expertise in these things to say, like, you think you want to do that right now, but let me tell you, you don't want to do it that way. This is how we want to do it. And being able to do that and just kind of expand on my knowledge and the things that I got to work on. And I'm really excited to be able to just kind of dive fully in and be that person for Marysville.
All right. So is there going to be overlap between you and the analyst that's about to retire?
I sure hope so. Yeah, he's supposed to be there for like the next month or so. So there'll be a little bit of overlap. Marysville is really cool coming in right now because there's a ton of development in the city. So they're really expanding very quickly. And with that, their chiefs are both newer. They were brought in from different departments. They've both been there 3.5 years. And so they're still kind of getting their bearings as to how Marysville works, much like Everett and a lot of other agencies. They kind of had a huge exodus in the past few years of retirees and people leaving the profession, and have gotten a lot of younger, newer officers in. And so they're going through kind of a natural culture shift there as well. And so there's just a lot of moving parts all changing at the same time. And so I'm excited because I'll be able to work with him a little bit on making sure there's continuity, but at the same time, understanding that as a department, there are things that they might want to adjust from the products he was making, and being able to say, yep, I think this is good, or we should move this in this way. I already told them, like, we're going to sit down and I am going to, like, your brain is going to be so fried by the time we're done, because I'm going to be like, here's this thing. What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? Let's that type of super intense. What are we keeping? What aren't we keeping? And why are we doing this? And why aren't we doing this? And so I'm very much looking forward to that aspect of it as well.
So let's get into a little bit about hiring. And I think, as I mentioned in the beginning of the show, we want to get into, you sat in on a couple of hiring boards. You just went through the hiring process yourself. So just wanted to get your take, get your advice on maybe some folks that are looking to get into the profession or switch jobs, and just what your viewpoint is.
Yeah, I had the opportunity. So in the past 3 years, I've sat on 3 hiring boards. 2 of them fairly recently. We had 2 what out here would be considered smaller mid-level agencies who have decided to create a analyst position, and then one that had a position and was just rehiring into it. And those experiences to me were very eye-opening from the perspective of departments bringing on analysts, and the there was this kind of interesting back and forth of like, yep, we want an analyst and they're going to sit in investigations and they're going to do this, that, and the other thing. And it's like, great. And then you would have a bunch of resumes come in. And I think that, and I'm talking hundreds of resumes in
Wow.
like a 2-week period. And they would start going through these resumes and they'd be like, wait, is this job what I think it is? And from the other perspective, going through some of these resumes and knowing what a crime analyst is, saying, oh, you saw the word analyst and thought that it meant this, right?
DNA.
Right. It's like, oh, no. Yeah, there were some that it's like, oh, you're looking to do forensics and that's actually this. We actually, there was a guy that interviewed for a position who said that, oh, well, I'm hoping to become a detective. And we actually stopped the interview and we're like, that's not how this works. Just so that like we don't want you to think that this is the path. Like maybe there's a department that does that. I personally can't think of one, but that's not what this position. There's no movement to detective. If you want to do that, you have to become a patrol officer, and that's a very different hiring process. And so there just was kind of that disconnect from the perspective of a person coming in to an analyst position, but also not fully understanding the expectations from the department level. And it's a brand new position. I told you yesterday I had 8 supervisors during my time in Everett, just because of all of the turnover from retirements and stuff like that. And of those 8, if you sat them all down and asked what an analyst does, you would get 8 different answers. Because they don't know, they don't do the work daily, they see the product of it sometimes. And so from the perspective of hiring on a new analyst, the first time I did it, I just kind of went with it and I was like, yeah, this is what you're going to see, and these are some of the things that they're going to use. And when I went into the second one, I actually went to the IACA website. I downloaded the analyst toolkit publication off of there, and I took that, and I think it's from the early 2000s, so it's somewhat outdated. But I took it and I just said, okay, for this piece of this toolkit, this is what Everett uses, and it's free. This is why we use it. It's free. It's great. Next piece, okay, we use this. It costs a lot of money, but this is how we use it in our department. Is it something that your department's going to use? Probably not, or absolutely, depending on what it is. That's the nice thing about Snohomish County, which is where Everett and Marysville are, is we have an integrated RMS system. So everyone in the county uses the same records management system, which means I have access to all of the records, police records in the county. So I know what's going on in other cities as well. And I had the opportunity then to say, oh, yeah, I know that you guys have a lot of this type of thing going on. So this tool would actually be helpful for you. And if you don't already have it, it's something you should get and your analyst can use. And so for them, that hiring process was a little bit easier because they were able to be like, oh, they mentioned this thing that they've done before. And so now we have a frame of reference. Whereas the first one, it was kind of like, they said this. What does that mean to you? And sometimes I'd be like, oh, well, this is what this is. And this, and other times I'd be like, I have no idea. That is not a term. I'm going to Google it. And it's like, oh, yep, that's something a business analyst does that, you know, and that was just a big piece of it. So I think from an analyst perspective, know what crime analysis is the first, I think that's kind of the first step of like, Google it, right?
Yeah.
Listen to the podcast, because there's a lot of good examples of what analysts do. Go to the IACA website, join a regional association or IACA itself and network with people. Find out what this job is.
It's so funny that you mentioned
be a
that
given.
because that's not the first time I've heard that.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting to hear this going on in 2024, that you have departments that decided to create an analyst position but don't know exactly what they want. And then you're getting people coming in that really don't know what the position is either. And there's just being a lot of confusion on both sides of the fence.
Yeah. And that it can really be if you don't have an analyst, this part's for the police departments. If you don't have an analyst sitting on your hiring board for an analyst, you're doing yourself a disservice because it is one of those jobs that your analyst is the subject matter expert in what they do. And there's a reason it's a specialty position. There's a reason that you hire the person into that position that you do. So it is important to have an understanding of what that position is going to be and what you want them to do, because there are some really specialized positions. A lot of the analysts that I was a part of the interview panels for, especially on the East Coast, were very specialized in what they were doing. They would come on to the call and they'd say, I work in gun violence, right? I work in New York, I work in Chicago, I work in Detroit, I work in Baltimore, and all I do is gun violence stuff, which is very important. It's very good work. But if you come into a department that has a homicide once every 3 years and it was a stabbing, or just like if you're going into a department that doesn't have gun violence, you're going to kind of fall on deaf ears if all you talk about is your gun violence work, right?
Yeah. Well,
So that leads into my second point, is if you're going to interview for these positions, you got to look for the aspects of your job that are going to work for the department that you're looking for. One of the things that I did when I was going through looking at Marysville is I pulled up their annual reports. I looked at their annual strategic initiatives. What is Marysville focused on? What are the things that they want to do or have historically wanted to do? And how do the things that I currently work on fit into those initiatives? Because that's what you're doing. You're selling your skills to that department. And studying gun violence, great. Maybe you know a lot about NIBIN entries and doing all those things, but you probably also use I2. What else can I2 be used for? Oh, networking, cool. So the department that you're working on has a lot of ORT, right? Okay, can you start to connect people in ORT rings? And that's something that you can do in I2. Do you have a group that's doing a lot of vehicle thefts? Can you start connecting those people, or license plates and stolen vehicles? Or what can you do? What skills do you have that you used in your gun violence work that can be used in other aspects of studying criminal activity?
Right. So when you're on these boards, and what do you look for in terms of skills for an analyst? What makes you decide I'm picking this person over these other folks?
I think being able to communicate with administrators, with the officers, with myself is a huge part of it. I'm able to look at resumes, right, and do that kind of picking out of, okay, you've done this, you've had these skills, you've been doing it for so long, all of those types of things that I can see on paper. I think a big part of being an analyst is being able to communicate in a way that's effective, understanding that because you are the subject matter expert and that you are going to be talking to people outside of analyst circles, can you talk to people at a level of their understanding? And that's not to say that you're talking to people that are dumb. It's just that they don't have the same jargon, technical jargon as you may have, or they may understand a concept differently. Is there a way that you can present it to them to get that knowledge? And it's hard to do that sometimes if you just have this list of questions of, have you ever seen an ethical violation? And if so, how did you? But there are opportunities in some of those. Oh, what have you done? Oh, I've done this, and this is a technical piece, but this is the outcome of it, and you're able to see it this way. I had an analyst bring in work that she had done for a previous agency, and that's not something that was asked for, but she brought in this portfolio, and that was so good because I had known her. She was somebody that I had worked with before, and she was able to show to the other people on that interview panel, like, this is what bulletins that I've created look like. Here are some other things that I've made for administrators. Here's something that I send out all of the time, and all of these different products. And they were able to be like, oh, wow, right? Like, this is this is really cool. And it's way better than being like, oh yeah, I know Publisher and PowerPoint and I can do that stuff. And
Did
so
she get the job?
she did. Yes.
What's her name? All right. So Sean Bair will be happy to hear that. So I don't know if you know Sean, but Sean is big proponent of having the portfolio. He and I did a whole series of hiring. I'll put the link in the show notes for that series. But sorry, go ahead, finish up.
No, she did a fantastic job, and the portfolio was really what helped her stand out from some of the other applicants. Yeah.
All right. So very good. And I think it's interesting because I think you mentioned this yesterday, is that, man, it seems like sometimes you're on a board, you're hiring, and you get, as you mentioned, maybe 100 applications. But then other times you might only get a handful of applications, and then you're like, well, wait a minute, none of these folks really fit. I wish I had more applicants to go through, because I don't think any of them are hitting the nail on the head.
Yeah. And even the ones that we had hundreds of applicants, you would look at the information and you'd be like, this isn't what we're looking for, right? This isn't. One of the big ones was, even there was one of the agencies, I think we ended up with 12 resumes that we had pulled, and we're like, yep, these people. And then we looked at them again and we're like, oh, they don't meet the minimum experience or education requirement. Usually you have to have this education or this much experience. And I think out of those ones, we ended up DQing 4 more people. And it was just like, for that position, they really wanted somebody that was kind of a plug and play opportunity, right? It was, if you don't have the experience to run this show, they don't have anybody that can train you up. They don't have anybody, right, that knows that job. And so they wanted somebody with experience to say, this is what my job is, right? And so even with those hundreds of resumes, a lot of them were immediately like, nope, this isn't it. This isn't it. And I don't know, some of them, it might have been that they just didn't sell themselves correctly, right? Like they didn't put the things that were recognizable as, oh yes, this is crime analysis work, or this is something that would come over, and that type of a thing. And so, because even I had applied for jobs at some point that were private, but they weren't crime analysis, they were other like sales analysis type things. And I'm like, it's the same thing I'm doing, except for instead of selling crime, I'm selling Funko Pops or whatever, right? Like it's the same thing. But if you don't know that this and this are the same type of thing, and they can be looked at in a similar way, and you don't know how to sell that on your resume, then you're just going to be excluded. And I do think that there is something to be said about going from crime analysis to like a business analyst position. I don't want to say it would be easier, but I definitely feel like going from a business analyst to a crime analyst would be difficult, because there is so much more you need to know about crime data and just some of the quirks of it.
Yeah. Well, and I did that transition, the former, not the latter. And so you rely on your technical skills, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're in an analyst position situation where they expect you to really know the neighborhood and really know crime, it's going to be a struggle for you. If they want you to come in and have more of a technical expertise in terms of your task, it's going to be a lot easier. So the reason I was laughing before is you said DQ, and I just envisioned like this trap door that you just hit a button.
Pull the lever, Kronk.
And just DQ'd people left and right. So that's what I was envisioning. But no, it is a lot, and I really do wish. And I've said this about associations and training. I really wish there were more classes on some of these skills that you hear about writing and speaking and selling. And because I hear that a lot, what you're saying here about communication, about selling yourself. And yet you've seen probably all the law enforcement analysis training that's out there. It's few and
Right.
far between that are hitting any of those skills.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that I think it needs to happen in a place that is before you are an analyst, right? You have to be able to communicate and sell yourself to get there. And so if you don't have those skills, if they're not something that you've had training or class, like I don't have any business classes. I never took anything like that. But I would imagine that there are some classes that are like, this is how you sell things, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's part of business. I never took any classes that were like that. Communication, and the closest I ever got was in my bachelor's. It was a law enforcement emphasis in criminal justice. So there was a report writing class, but it was writing police reports.
Mm-hmm.
And so the big things were like, don't use jargon, don't use these big words, make sure you define all these things, and which are important in report writing. But I don't write reports as an analyst in the way that police write reports, right? I might do like an executive summary type of a thing. And that experience, that writing experience, came from being in a master's program where you have to write a bunch of papers. But if that's not something that you have to do as a certification or anything like that, you're missing out on that experience too. One of the things that I have floated with NORCAN is having some sort of like a student subset thing, whatever, where we can go into some of these programs and do a mock interview, right? If you want to get into a criminal justice field, the great thing about them is their government. And so they kind of have to follow a template of a civil service interview. So you might have questions that are similar, but the setup is going to be the same, right? You've got 40 minutes, 7 questions, go, right? To get that like one where you're like sweating and you don't know how English works anymore because you're under stress that you've never been under, like get that out of the system and get feedback, because that's the other thing that you don't get from interviews a lot of the time is feedback. And then do like a resume building thing. Like, what are the skills that you should focus on in your resume? How do you word them so that they make you stand out? And that's getting interesting now too, because AI is getting involved with resumes. And I've learned something recently about that, is that you shouldn't have anything as a picture on your resume because it'll automatically throw it out. Like people won't even see it. And I had never heard that before.
There's a lot of danger in that. I feel I've heard that too about AI throwing certain resumes out, and you really need to have keywords on your resume. So I do think there's a little bit of danger in that type of automation. You hear that a lot with HR. HR threw out resumes before even it made it to the hiring manager. And I think there's some danger in that as well.
Yes.
Because then everybody's just looking for keywords. And I actually had a buddy, he was here in Florida. He went to hire a position. He got way too many applicants. And so then he had to shut it down and start over again. And then he did ones where it was more on keywords, and about 5 of them got like some inside information, got the keywords, but then none of them were qualified for the position.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we're in a weird space for resumes right now, I feel like.
Yeah, it is really, really odd. So no, I like the idea though of definitely working with the next generation and seeing what NORCAN can do to help out the next generation. All right, let's move on to personal interest then. And just to finish up the interview, you are into Dungeons and Dragons. And
I am.
I've heard a variety of levels with Dungeons and Dragons. So you kind of need to help me out. Like, what level of Dungeons and Dragons player are you? Is this one of those things you get together sometimes, you work out a mission, or is this something where like the room is decorated, you guys are going all like out in terms of dressing and cosplay? What level are you at D&D wise?
I would say we're a happy medium. We don't dress up.
Okay.
Although I wouldn't put it past some of our people. I'm sure they would love to dress up. I have general decor that is D&D adjacent in my house, but not, I don't have like a room with special lighting and a fog machine and a table that rises out of the floor with the battleship or like anything like that. We do get together twice a month. We have two, so they're called campaigns, right? Two separate kind of stories going on. I am the dungeon master or the game master for one of them. So I get to kind of set the storyline and lead the players on the journey and all the different missions. And I get to do the voices for all of the player characters and non-player characters and make decisions about who is going to roll the dice for certain outcomes and stuff like that. And then I get to play in the other one as a character. So I get to kind of do best of both worlds, and each one of those campaigns then meets once a week.
Gotcha. That's interesting. My son did it for a little bit, and he learned how to play, and then he was dungeon master with a group of 4 of his friends there, and I helped him get the TV set up so he could have the map on the TV and whatnot.
Very cool. Very cool.
But it's all, and I've even played a campaign once, and I'm like, I mean, you could spend all day in one room just trying to figure out what's all in the one room. Yeah, right. Yep. There's just it's a lot to go over, and I found that if there wasn't a leader per se of like how they were going to direct the group, it could be completely chaotic.
Oh yes, very much so. Very much so. But for me, it's a great opportunity to unplug, right? Like we as analysts are in front of a computer all day, 40 hours a week. This is a great opportunity to be like, nope, we're getting out our pencil and paper, and we have painted these little miniature people, and we're going to set up all of this stuff, and we're just going to talk to each other and communicate and make crazy, stupid decisions that have nothing to do with our outside life and have no impact on them at all. So it's a great opportunity to do that. If it's something, I have mentioned this before because we had another analyst that was very active in NORCAN who was like, we should do something at one of the conferences, like board game, tabletop, something or whatever. And I would love to be able to set up something like that for people just to like try it, like see what it's about. It's math, so high fantasy math, if you will. So it's something that I'm sure analysts would be really good at.
Oh man, I wish we lived closer. My neighbor is into board games. He actually goes to conferences for board games. And
they have some really good ones out here in the Pacific Northwest.
And he has over 100 board games. He can talk your ear off about board games.
Yeah.
So. All right. Very good. So, hey, well, good luck in Marysville. I'll be in contact in the future just to get an update to hear how things are going. But good luck. So our last segment to the show is Words to the World. This is where you can promote any idea that you wish. What are your words to the world?
Ooh, I got to be really careful with this one because I don't want people to get fired and say it's my fault, right? Like there's an asterisk with this one. It is okay sometimes to ask for forgiveness instead of permission. Be very careful with that one, right? Like you don't want to be like, oh, I'm going to do this thing and it's going to be a big deal. But sometimes there are things that you can do and just be like, I did this. Hope that's okay. Use that sparingly, but it's definitely a mantra that I have whispered to myself as I'm completing tasks.
Very good. Well, I leave every guest with you've given me just enough to talk bad about you later.
Wonderful.
But I do appreciate you being on the show, Emily. Thank you so much, and you be safe.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for making it to the end of another episode of Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. You can show your support by sharing this and other episodes found on our website at www.leapodcasts.com. If you have a topic you would like us to cover or have a suggestion for our next guest, please send us an email at leapodcasts@gmail.com. Till next time, analysts, keep talking.